Here we are on July 9th, about 9 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles. Anthony and Gabe and I are together. Expect some others to drop in and continue our discussion about the mental obsession. We are also, some of us are walking in the morning and talking about bullet points of this discussion so that we can simplify the basic premise and talk about it in ways that allow anyone listening and anyone contemplating these things or struggling with these things to begin to just practice the contemplation of those things that we're working on and any others that you can think of that are principled in nature and stretch the bounds of any conflicted thinking you might have to the point where you begin to realize your own culpability and sensitivity to those thoughts that you have that you struggle with. Certainly, my awareness of those things is what led me in the direction of focusing on this discussion. My sense is there is not much emotional sobriety since it's about sanity, there's not much emotional sobriety in thinking that my thinking is the sole source of my reality and that my thinking is the truth and that what I think of people and think of things is in fact what those things and people are rather than simply what I think, and start to divest my experience of making believe that all I am is what I think and all that's possible is what I think, and start to see that all possibility is always possible no matter what I think, and start to put thinking in its place, which is to do for me what I direct it to do. And if I've been directing it to feel condemned, I've been asking it to do what it cannot do, which is impossible. And one thing that thoughts can't become is reality and truth if reality and truth existed before thoughts. So to have that basic idea in my brain is to think who I am, become those thoughts. And now I'm actually fraudulent in my ideas about who I am, wondering why I feel like a fraud and I'm embarrassed and easily self-conscious about things, which is defined as undue appearance, undue regard for appearance, because all I'm doing is projecting an image of who I think I am rather than recognizing that I am the one projecting that image. And that my essence is, in fact, not the thinking, but a sense of being and a sense of knowing that far transcends the thinking I do. And if I think in that order, all of a sudden I don't feel the disorders and the self-abuse and the self-condemnation and a lot of those other things that are attached to the word self-loathing and self-hate and all of those things. And I don't need self-confidence and I don't need ambition and all those things to try to overcome it, because I've actually begun to concede that my essence has always been my essence and my essence is shared with everyone. It's the same thing, and it isn't even a thing. It's just a present nature and knowingness and awareness. And if that's the basis of our existence, then we already know much more than we ever think we know. And when we begin to concede that, our thinking is allowed to begin to express. We're giving our thinking permission effectively to express that knowing nature so that there's less conflict and less disabilities and less disorders, anxious disorders, etc., physical disorders. Because we're not opposing reality. Opposition to is taking a position as though the position I'm taking is the right and only position, when in fact, to look at it accurately, any position I take confirms every other position that can be taken. So it unifies me in its actual meaning, and it seems to segregate me in the thoughtless meaning that I give it. So anyway, we're here to do a little of that. It's morning. I've been told today that early morning may not be the best time for this discussion because it can be a little eye-opening at a point when eyes are barely open. So I think we got started today just before 7 and took a walk around the marina and talked about it as we're sort of hammering out these bullet points. So welcome. Jana, good to see you. Anthony, Gabe. Any weekly thoughts, ponderings, contemplatings?
WEAK?
Both.
Well, maybe Jack, you could go over that zero dimension thing we touched on this morning.
You know, it never occurred to me until you said that, and I really appreciate it because I've kind of been struggling with I didn't realize until a couple of years ago that a one-dimensional space actually has 2 points. And Gabe said something today during our walk and it went bam and sort of hit. And what's interesting just about that experience is it's sort of emblematic of the knowing nature we have. When we hear something or align our thinking with it, it feels like a bit of an explosion or a pop or an enlightening, like all of a sudden the light goes on. But in fact, the light was always on, and what I'm doing in my perception and aligning my thinking with it is conceding how things are. And all of a sudden it feels like the world lights up when in fact I'm beginning to simply notice the lighter world that I have darkened by my own insistence on those limitations. So that's a precursor. So Gabe pointed out that I had said to LA was walking with us and Gabe, and I said that the first dimension is 2 points, which I always found interesting because you'd think the first dimension would be 1 point. And he said, 0 dimension is 1 point. No dimension is 1 point. And I said, oh, that's interesting because that's what the thing I struggled with is that 2 points obviously gives you at least some perspective. It doesn't give you the depth of 3 dimensions, but it certainly gives you a perspective of, say, an opposite of one extreme or the other, right? You have 2 points. One would be the extreme opposite of the other point, but in fact, they're both connected by the fact that they have common ground in between them, number one, and that if I'm imposing, if I think the other one shouldn't be and shouldn't exist, I'm actually confirming that it does exist and should be, since it is, by simply thinking I can oppose it, right? So in this one-dimensional space, which is actually 0 dimensions, which I would say is nothing, is the idea that who I am is what I think. And that would require truth and reality to be thinking, to endow thinking with as the creators of truth and reality, rather than the thinking I'm doing about things that are seemingly true and real. I don't know if they are. They could be illusions because they're all transitory. Most of what I see are forms. But the point that led to this was making the point that Gabe was making, that when I'm in it, I can't see it. When I'm in that thinking, I can't see it. And I said, because you have no perspective. You're trying to make a single point that can't be made. And in mathematics, too, you may be able to help with this, Gabe. There's no way to make a point in mathematics because every point you make in any size would cover any other point that's smaller than that. So it would disallow those other points to exist, which means the thing that's making the point can't make the point.
Yeah, there is no point.
Exactly. So here, this idea that who I am is what I think has no point at all. Yeah. And so what do? I fight to fill it. I fight to be fulfilled. The self-fulfilling prophecy is a prediction that I think the unpredictability of what's going to happen next in terms of my relation to everything, I need to overcome that and create some certainty. But the certainty is that I'll never have any certainty in anything but doubt by making believe who I am is only what I think. Because I can't make the point. There is no place. In the first dimension, those 2 points align. The range between those 2 points is defined by the 2 points. There is no line before there's 2 points. So the 2 points define it. In the third dimension, it's an intersecting line, gives us depth, that's what we see things as in our life form typically. We see things in 3 dimensions. They have extreme positions to left or right, for instance, and or up and down. And that gives us a sense of depth. But the dimensions have all been created. This is where this discussion started. The dimensions have all been created by humans. They're not separate. They just have characteristics that have been used to separate them. And for us to think of them as distinct is for us, again, to think that thinking is reality and truth, rather than see that the dimensions are not distinct, that conditions are intimately connected to every other seeming separate dimension. And what happens when you get past third and fourth, you start to get into the fifth and sixth dimension, you're moving into the infinite space, which means that that infinite space is also part of the first and second and third and fourth dimension. And I would say can't be part of no dimension in the sense that there's nothing there to be part of. It's kind of where illusion becomes reality. And it's a possibility to think those things, but it's not a possibility to live in those things, except for the effects that are created that cause anxiety and stress and mental disorders in our experience that are all accurately pointing to the fact that we're thinking something that is backward, reversed. Disorders suggest there's a reversal going on. It's kind of like seeing ourselves in the mirror. And I think you brought up the TikTok thing, Gabe, right?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah.
That's all right. So TikTok, they showed people how they actually look by reversing their faces, and people got very upset because we've always only seen ourselves from the perspective of how we look in a mirror or in a photograph, but it's exactly the opposite of how we actually look to anyone else. So we can't see ourselves accurately unless we manipulate the images that we project. We're very, very close to what we're talking about in relation to maintaining the premise that who we are is what we think. And photographs do the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing as our eye. The thing we use to see with, we can't see. We never see our own eyeball except in an image or an appearance, projected by something, reflected by something. And the reflection of our thoughts are our feelings. So when we're feeling discouraged and we're feeling hateful, we're feeling those things in relation to the thinking that we're doing, not the things we're assigning those things to out there that we're trying to claim appear to be doing these things, but the actuality of it, it's what we're doing in our own thinking that's causing that presumption that it's everything and everyone else out there that's doing it. It's what we're doing. We're the cause. So that to fill the void of no dimension is to try to make a point that can't be made. And I would say that's a very good description of what addiction does by constantly trying to do more in the name of thinking we'll finally get somewhere, rather than realizing we're already in the only place we can ever be, which is in the present. And if we're always in the present, we're with everything else that there is, because nothing happens that isn't present. So it must all be happening in the present now. So we have everything where we are, searching for where we think we need to get, which is the claim we're not where we are. So while we're where we are, claiming we shouldn't be there, we try to get somewhere else because we're thinking we're not there. Doesn't mean we're not there. It means we're not thinking we're not there. It doesn't mean that that seeming void of a zero dimension can't be considered to be true and considered to be a point worth making and spending my whole life fighting for that thing that is simply a thought, imagining it's real and true. The infinite realm is simply the realm of the possibility that we have a human body, that we have a universe, that we have a world, that we have something that we can express that being nature, that loving nature, that absolute nature, that unchanging present nature through the expression of that. So if we're channels of that and we're trying to block the channel we have by thinking who we are is all we think and need to think obsessively about it to maintain that self, because without the thinking, there is no self. And we think our life is at risk if we don't keep thinking obsessively about what we think about ourselves and who we think we are and what we think we must do to look better at being that self and keep that self from changing, because we want to guarantee that there's a permanence to it, like reality we must be admitting that we know what reality and truth is, to think that giving a permanent impression of our thinking permanence by constantly repeating it would mimic reality. We have an awareness that's much greater than the thinking we're doing. So I don't know if I hit all the points there, but it was kind of a landslide of
No pun intended.
Thank you. But it was really a windfall of insight that I really appreciate. And I have learned that interacting with people, to any degree, I'm maintaining ideas that are that zero dimension, that single pointedness. The only thing that offers me perspective are other people and other places and other things. It's how I'm interacting with those other things that begin to challenge the premise of my ideas And I don't like being challenged because I think the desperation of my situation requires everything to think like me and act like me and look like me, or it puts me at risk. And all that's at risk is the thinking I'm doing, that who I am is what I think. That's it. And the real freedom comes, like any lie promises a broken promise. So the lie says, you're condemned if you stop thinking, when in fact, when I stop thinking that who I am is what I think, when in fact freedom comes. So if I start seeing that any desperation is also it giving me an effect that's exactly the opposite of what's actually happening, but is also worth noting because it's an accurate reflection of what I'm thinking. If what I'm thinking is fraudulent and that who I am is what I think, feeling like an imposter would be natural, because I'm trying to impose on reality and truth a weight that can't be borne in the weightlessness of reality and truth. Because there is no weight in reality and truth, because there is no space in reality and truth, because an infinite void or an infinite source doesn't have any relative, something can't be more or less within it. So this may be over talking to the point, but so I do and so I'm doing. It's very interesting. And did I miss anything, Gabe?
No, I think it's going to be, I think it's a point, no pun intended, to be expanded upon, the perspective and the examination of points and how we're trying to sort of, when you look at something, you've affected its outcome. And when you look at thinking, you're thinking about thinking. All of these things, I think, are always interconnected, and there'll be more to uncover on the dimension and I think it's really about perspective, like you were saying. It's seeing things in a different perspective, looking at meaning of words and things in a different perspective.
Well, and that I would say is all the human experience, because my other sense is that this egoistic drive, this idea of turning nothing into something, is effectively what an infinite source is. It doesn't seem like it's anything because we can't see it. And it doesn't seem like it's anything because it isn't limited to space and time. So all the things we use as calculators or assessments of what reality and truth are, that other thing doesn't have. And it's interesting that so too would that aspect of our thinking be, and why we end up feeling condemned, because the condemnation is coming from the idea that if an infinite source can't be quantified, can't be considered in limited terms, if it can't be subdued, if it can't be grasped, if it just is what it is, then we are already it. We don't need to get to it to have it. And we only have it to the degree that we realize it has us. It isn't something that we did. It isn't something we do. It's a gift. Generosity is generally considered something that's given naturally. And if the infinite source is an infinite source, everything that exists has always been given freely, has always been available freely. And the only limitations to it, the scarcity, are these cities we build that are filled with fear. Scarcity. In thinking that abundance is up to us, thinking abundance is something I have to achieve, thinking abundance isn't something I have, so I need to desperately, I started with nothing and built something, that kind of attitude. If we started with nothing, then we at least started with a recognition that everything was already ours, if we're being honest. But what people tend to normally think is we don't have title to anything. We don't have a car. We don't have a house. We don't have the stuff that would be the trappings of seeming life. So that struggle goes on. And I think we talked about the fact that anybody listening does not have to see this in the words we're using to know it. And we sort of use the metaphor that if you're at a restaurant and going to eat, nobody's ever required to only eat what someone else eats in the name of solidarity and a name of unity, because the point is to eat. It's not about what we eat. It's not about the flavors we choose. It's not about the tastes, the crunch, none of it. It's about eating. It's about nourishment. And if this food for thought is nourishing, then the words we use to identify it and the words we use to relate to it don't have to be any of the words that are being said here, but maybe the words we start having in our own experience that begin to concede things that we've been wrapping words around perpetually, continually, and obsessively to make believe that repeating them long enough will in fact someday make them true, when in fact that never seems to happen now. It's always planned on as something that will happen, yet it never seems to happen now. Why? The present is always full. It's always complete. It's always whole. Even those words aren't really accurate, because something with no bounds doesn't live in a space that's whole. It isn't one. It's a unity that doesn't even include one. We think of it that way because that's what thinking does, is analyze things according to relative concepts. That's what a brain does for a body in a world that seems to be relative, in a universe that seems to be relative. So yes, I think it morphs, Gabe, into so many different conversations and so many different options, because everything we're witnessing is actually giving us all the information to confirm our greater awareness. And what we're choosing to see is what we're making out of the thinking we do. And if we make believe the thinking we do is true and real, we think what we've made. We think thinking of things the way we think of them becomes what those things are. And here's another thing to consider in relation to your comment about the fact that when we observe things, we change them. My sense is it isn't the observation of them that changes them. It's that the observation we have when we think those things are what we think all of a sudden creates an imposition on those things that's recognizable, because we're not seeing them as they are, because if we were, there would be nothing for us to see and nothing for us to think about. We would just be letting them be. We would be free. There would be no imposition. There would be no opposition. There would be no contrary thinking about it that would cause any of those ripples. And the ripples don't even exist in reality because there's nothing in that dimension other than the thinking we're doing. So what ripples is our thoughts. And then we get run over by the waves we create, overwhelmed by the sensations we create in that thinking. So that's a question, Gabe. Einstein talked about us affecting everything we look at, that when we observe it, it's changed. Maybe it's the change we're observing with that's changing it, not the thing. It's the perception that we're having that it's changing because we're seeing it from the self-serving view, serving the self we think we are by seeing it only as we think it is rather than as it actually is, which is unaffected by us because it's already the sum total of us in that knowing sense.
Is that Einstein or that Schrodinger's cat?
Yeah, it's more of a quantum mechanics thing, but I think what Jack is talking about is when we're looking at our thoughts, we're bringing to bear a lot of perspective, warped or not, and it's altering our perception of what is.
Yeah, and when you say perception, and I don't think it's all perception, I think the idea that our thoughts are true and real is perception, right? Reality doesn't need to be perceived to be real. So the only thing we struggle with in terms of our own perception are the decisions we make that we think are true that aren't true. And my guess is we wouldn't need to make those decisions if they were true, because we'd be automatically operating on that basis. So to be making those decisions shows how intent we think we need to be in our thinking to make things right, when it's the thinking that makes it, the thinking we do that make, like we said, we talked about earlier, that we all have the right to think whatever we want. But the beauty of that is it doesn't mean what we're thinking is right. So in the freedom, we have the freedom to gauge and to grasp and to expand enough not to have any thought at all about something, and realize that we can even have the thought and concede that the thing is what it is, regardless of what I think. And we can also live with the opinion that all things are as what I think they are. And that would be self-centered, narcissism, psychopathy, sociopathological thinking, because it's completely devoid of any interactive, becomes only what I think. Psychopathology would also be focused solely on my psychotic state, but my psychology, my thinking, as being all that is. So I think you said it clearly, Gabe, in the fact that if I'm seeing an imposition in that thing, what I'm seeing is the imposition of my own misunderstanding of that thing and my own misimposition, my own imposition on that thing that's been imposed by the contrary thinking I'm doing about it, that only appears in my own perception, not reality. And it doesn't affect reality and truth at all. That thing is the thing. It only appears to be affected by that because of this preoccupation of thinking that our thinking is the sole source of reality. We think that when it has an impact or affects something, that the effect is in fact the cause of reality, when in fact it's being caused by the thinking we're doing, that thinking is real. There's an opposition to reality in that thinking because there's no position I can take that will ever make that true, because it's already true, it's already real, it's already as it is today. That reality. And must be who I am as an observer. That must be the source of my observation, rather than the thinking about my observation that gets set off in these sort of wonky ways. I just don't think we've facilitated our capacity well by conceding that we have bodies, we have brains, they are at our disposal, and so we dispose of them and channel them in the ways that we choose to do. Not in ways that are forced on us or we have to do, or there's no other choice. And any of that stuff we use as an excuse to bow out and undermine our actual capacity by denying and ignoring what's actually happening and thinking that it isn't happening. I think we're the only creature that can think what's happening isn't happening simultaneously, or shouldn't be happening, or we wished it wasn't happening, and all that other kind of stuff. Those are internal fights that cannot be won as long as they're maintained. And effectively what obsessive thinking is. So those are a couple more windows to look through as though there's something not to see.
And where do the co-conspirators fit in? They have to align everything correctly.
Well, they give you an audience and then they agree with you.
I don't think if we weren't in doubt, we wouldn't be looking for other people's assurance. You follow that?
We know it's bullshit, so we get someone else to bullshit with us.
Yeah. Make it easier.
Well, and we call it bullshit like it's not human shit. I think we said, which is another way of sort of disavowing, we have nothing to do with it. It's the human species is full of feces. In terms of the thinking, it's not, and the reason, think about what feces, what shit really is. It's a byproduct of everything left over with anything valuable has been taken from it. So when we eat food, all the nourishment goes into our organism to feed it and fuel it. And what's left is what we don't need because it has no value. It's a waste product. So what do? The body knows what to do with it. Our brain doesn't seem to be as well equipped as the body to notice that letting go absolutely is beginning to realize that we've never hung on to anything but the thought we hung on to the thing. We imagine something and forget that we are the imagineers of that thing. We forget the impact of these things we think immediately cause us to see everything as happening to us and is something we can't avoid doing because we've created something out of absolutely nothing that doesn't exist except to the thinking about it that we continue to do. Which is why obsessive thinking is so disturbing.
Is it ever?
And Gabe's point earlier is when I'm in it, I can't see it. And I said, think about it. When we choose to think who we are is what we think now we're inside thoughts. Our eyeballs never see our eyeballs, but they always know to help us see. They always know what to do because that's what they're designed to do. They don't have to see themselves for them to do what they do. When I think I'm in thoughts, I don't think there's anything to think about because all I am is that thought. I don't have any perspective. I've given my perspective up for the claim it's my absolute truth. It's my absolute reality. If that is a lie, then disorders, again, are this reversal of thinking that if I'm seeing things in a reversed order, I am the reverser. The idea that somehow it's things that are wrong, people that are wrong, life that is wrong, the universe that is hard and complicated is all a perception of trying to disavow a knowingness that cannot be escaped, set aside, eliminated, minimized, maximized. It's just what it is. It's the nature of existence. Everything is based on that absolute state of being and awareness. None of us have to think about it the same way for that to be true. Because truth doesn't ask thinking of anyone, because truth is knowing. Reality is knowing. It's an absolute state of being. It isn't based in thought and it isn't created out of thought. But if I align my thoughts with that single thought, all of a sudden, all of my thinking gets better. But what I had learned to do most of my life was try to fix all the single thoughts, which basically mired me in a constant attempt to fix what kept growing because I was giving each one of these thoughts credit for being real. I was giving myself the impression that I was making progress by trying to deal with something one at a time, rather than see that I could deal with all thinking in all ways at once. If I have a thinking problem, looking at the thinking would be the source of the solution. And beginning to see that there is no solution in an infinite source because there is no problem. And start to realize that if I've been seeking assurance, what I've been seeking is why I think I don't have it. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for God to give it to me, because if God is an infinite source, it's already given everything to everyone and everything all the time. There's no time in it. So it can't have a start or a finish. And yet for us here, what it does to reveal the absolute is that it's always beginning. It's always new. It's always starting. What does that mean? We're always capable of rethinking whatever we want at any moment, never condemned to anything we're thinking, including what's Janet changing into.
I'm stringing my bathing suit. When I washed it, it came out.
Looked like you'd taken it off. Came
Yeah.
over your head all of a sudden.
Oh.
So in the simplest terms, as far as I can gauge it, which is not generally always that simple, but my sense is we've taken a self seriously enough to believe it's who we are, so we don't know how to laugh at the joke that's on us. And the serious nature of taking something seriously that doesn't even exist is not the problem of the thing that doesn't exist. It's the problem of the serious nature of the thinking about it as though it exists. That's the problem. So if I take that thinking seriously, I think I have a person. I take it personally. I think I have a person to offend, to be offended. So if I'm offended, it's really just my thinking that isn't aligned with someone else's thinking. And I can't be offended if I'm not defensive. And lies are always based on a defense against the idea of reality and truth, which is the idea that the lie is in fact true and real. Who I am is what I think would be a lie. And when who I am is what I think, there will be no thinking necessary for me to be that thing, whatever that essence is. It isn't even a thing. Because right now, if that is true, there's nothing I need to think about for that to be. So it sort of puts to rest the idea that I need to get somewhere or something else, somewhere else, more or less of something else to resolve my problem. The problem is now. It's what I'm thinking now. It's how I'm thinking now. And as I begin to see that it's a choice I make presently, and I'm responsible for presently, and I'm never a victim, except to the ideas I have that create that opinion so that I can continue to maintain the responsibility for what I'm thinking, it starts to become obvious that if I'm choosing it and doing it, I must be insane to continue. And I would say to that point, bingo. If I'm maintaining something that doesn't exist and talking to myself about it and thinking to myself about it, I'm thinking to a self in thought. I'm thinking to a self in thought that I think is myself that isn't myself. So that's talking and thinking to things that don't exist. That's a pretty good definition of insanity at a very base level. So how would I have emotional sobriety in that? How would I have a sober sanity? So sobriety is about sanity. Sobriety isn't limited to people who aren't drinking. It's a life choice of facing life on life's terms and seeing that it's always going to be life's terms that we've always faced, no matter what we're thinking and the faces we use to mask the self we think we are and constantly try to maintain. None of those masks will ever be true, but we can think they are because we're free. Love gives us that freedom. So if we have absolute freedom and we use that freedom to hold ourselves in contempt, it isn't because we're in contempt or condemned. It's because the thinking we're doing, not the thinking we're doing. It's because the thinking we're causing or thinking we have decided is true and real. That's when it all goes to shit, literally. It's just the premise that thinking is true and real that gives us the impression that, for instance, expectations are the only things that should happen in relation to what I thought would happen when I had the thought. If all the possibility that exists all of a sudden is reduced to the only the one thing that I thought should happen, that is a minimization of possibility in the name of thinking it's the only possibility. You can see the conflict. And it shows up quickly as you're willing to look, you'll start to see. And the looking isn't, what do I think I'm doing? The looking is starting to see that when I think I'm not doing, when I think I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, I'm not noticing that I am doing what I'm doing to even be thinking I shouldn't be doing it. And getting a little more fundamental in my awareness and conceding, wow, I've been doing this my whole life. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this unnecessarily, thinking it's imperative. Thinking my life depends on it, thinking there's no other choice, thinking there's no other option. The option of choice is always the option not to choose, always. All choices are possible, including the one that says we don't have to choose. That's freedom. So another reversal is with judgments. There's nothing wrong with judgments. People talk about not having judgments and not wanting to judge and stopping judge. That's not the problem. The problem is when I think my thoughts are true and real, I think my judgments are actually real and true. And that everyone I think of in relation to that judgment is condemned to my thinking. And who's really condemned by that thinking? I am. Same with duality. People say, it's not a dual world. Okay. I'm not condemned by duality. I'm condemned by thinking that a single point within duality is the only point. What's the single point? Whatever I think it is. Starting to think that things are only what I think they are rather than things are what they are, regardless of what I think. Whatever they are. So now I don't have to think about them to let them be. I don't have to think about them at all. Now I have a relationship to them that is accurate. Just like with expectations, if I start to expect everything that can happen to happen, because everything that can happen has always happened, and everything that can happen is happening right now, I start to create a relationship to what's actually happening that's not at odds. It's not in conflict. Starting to live with, in my experience, what's actually happening. Now, what's interesting about what's actually happening is it's the only thing I can ever affect productively and functionally to get any kind of meaningful result. Because all the other results I get are depression and anxiety and disorders and conflicts and emotional turmoil and fights and struggles and what I don't like, what I don't want. And yet, if I'm doing them, I'm creating them. and I must be wanting them to create them. Every choice is a prayer, and every choice comes with a want. We don't choose things because we don't want them. And when we say that's our only choice, we're lying about it, trying to claim irresponsibility for the thing we think we're going to fix by the thing we think is our only choice. We're always present. We're always aware. We always know. And if we weren't, and if we didn't, we wouldn't recognize so quickly and clearly what's wrong. And rather than feel condemned to what's wrong and think we need to get away from it, here's that reversal again. Thinking the only thing I can do is get away from this and feel better about it. That's not true. Because effectively, there's nothing to get away from, except the idea that I'm trying to justify continuing by thinking it's the only thing I can do. And that there's something to get away from. There's another lie. There's something to get away from. What do I take with me mentally everywhere I go? But my mental thoughts. If what I've learned to do is repeat the same old thought and wonder why I keep getting the same old feeling, I'm acting as though I'm not doing what I'm doing to have that thought, maintain that feeling. And our present state is where this all becomes obvious, because it's the only place we're ever in, only place we've ever been, the only place we can be in the greatest sense, in the greatest awareness, in the greatest sense of knowing. The only place we can be, nowhere else. We're never where we think we are. And think about it. The only way we could obviously be where we think we are is if thinking is real and true. So to think my preoccupation with thoughts takes me from where I am, gives thoughts once more credit for being able to void reality and truth, which is always where I am, always present, always unflappable, unchangeable. If it's unchangeable, I can't change it. I can think I change it, and that's the struggle I have with this thing I call myself, not with reality and truth, because I think the truth is the self. The truth is the imposter. Wonder why I feel a fraud. Not true, not going to be true, never will be true. It isn't true. It's simply this imagined point I'm trying to make in the non-existence of everything, which may, in fact, Gabe, this might also be interesting, that the nothingness may be the source of everything because it's the space for everything. So the thing I'm using to hide as though I'm not there is the thing that actually provides the potential for not only me, but everything and everyone to exist within this life form that we're experiencing, this human life form.
Can I ask a side note? Why do we tend to condemnation?
Because we think our thoughts that are contemptful are true. So what do? We don't take responsibility for it because it's irresponsible to think it. So what we do is blame somebody else. The domino effect of the reversal continues to ripple outward in the exact same way it starts. The seed of the tree becomes the seed, the tree that grows, right?
Mm.
So we feel condemned, but are busy holding other people in contempt and spiting them because we're looking for ways out of what we're insisting we're in, and we're not even in it. It's delusional. It's like a mirage. So one of the things I think we've talked about before, Gabe, is to notice that if we have that opinion, and the question is, why do we have it? And I would say because we're thinking insane thoughts, which kind of sums it up and wraps it up and at least becomes all encompassing rather than think of the thought specifically and think if I can resolve that, I'll be better off, when in fact another one seems to always take its place on the same basis because I haven't dealt with the basis, I've dealt with the effect, right? So it's starting to concede that I'm probably thinking things I don't even think I'm thinking. And I say probably because if I said you're thinking thoughts you don't think you're thinking and your initial reaction is no, I'm not, then I've given you the perfect environment to reinforce the resistance and the opposition and this claim that we're everything we can't be and to not anything we actually are through my own action. So I'm going to say probably, maybe. And what's interesting is if you maybe probably concede something as true, maybe, possibly, don't even have to agree with it, it will start becoming obvious because it will start to be applicable in everything that you do because it's been there the whole time while you've been busy trying to pretend it wasn't. And that's the exhaustion of this living with this condemnation, this depression, this anxiety, this stress that we create. That's all evidence of this constant chronic attempt to misuse our thinking. In the name of thinking, we'll get it right so we can claim to be the dominator of the world, the creator of the world and the universe, and finally get credit when in fact we've already been given everything. We don't need credit at all to have it all. The only person who needs the most credit is the one in bankruptcy. And you know why they can't get it? Because they're in bankruptcy. That impossibility of us trying to get enough credit to solve the bankrupt idea that who we are is what we think is the impossibility that drives people to think they can't take it anymore. And what it is they're taking is more and more of their own thinking and this commitment they have to this merry-go-round that is not so merry because it becomes a vicious cycle of hatred and self-loathing and self-doubt and abuse. Tends to be why we want to stay alone, because first of all, we don't want to be found out. So staying alone helps us to continue to manufacture these thoughts and make believe that nobody notices, when in fact, certainly our missing, our not being available is noticed and our productive capacity is noticed. It may not have to be noticed to a brain for it to be noticed in terms of the sum total of everything being productive in the world and functional. So the notice becomes the lack of sum total we're creating in terms of the potential benefit we have to offer, which is ultimately why in sobriety, service is such a critical aspect of it, because it's starting to give away what we have. And one of the paradoxes, like we talked earlier, is that if we give it away to keep it, we're obviously not dealing in a limited source. We're dealing in something unlimited. Same thing as we die to live. What's dying? The idea that our life is dependent on our maintaining thoughts that aren't true, maintaining the thought that who I am is what I think. As soon as I think my thoughts are reality and truth, of course, I become the creator of reality and truth. Who else would I want to be but a product born of that thought? It's an insane thought to begin with. The insanity continues as long as I continue to watch the masquerade parade. And I'm literally, it's an illusion of my own making and a narrative that I continue to develop and create stories to abound with this fictive sensory perception I'm creating that has nothing to do with reality at all and everything to do with trying to replace reality and truth, which is impossible and unnecessary. So the condemnation is the idea that we can do what can't be done. We can turn a lie into truth. And that's the irony of a lie, is it's only a lie as long as we think it's true. A lie isn't a lie when you recognize that it's a lie. It becomes truth in terms of the human concept of truth. It's accurate. So if the content of the lie is that all I am is what I think, then thinking is the culprit here. It's not the limits of my own awareness of that self, because the self I'm going to create is going to feel condemned. Why? Because it's not true what I'm thinking, and I'm thinking it's reality and truth, and all of a sudden I think it becomes my reality and truth. That's a horrible thing to face. And I would say present traumatic stress is what people suffer from, not post-traumatic stress, because the present is where the suffering is done. And it's what we do with that. When I'm busy trying to think about a situation that stopped years ago, decades ago, and is not happening again, I'm the one responsible for the recreation of those images that stress me and traumatize me presently. And I'm not suggesting I shouldn't have them, but by having them as something that isn't happening now, I'm continuing to maintain them as something I have no control over whatsoever and no possibility of ever affecting in any way. So what do I feel? More morose, more depressed. Not because of the situation that has ended decades before, or a week or two, or whatever the time is, but because of my persistent insistence that what I'm thinking is true and real. Does that image give me the justification to make believe continuing to feel the trauma from it is somehow validating the fact that I'm actually going into the past and facing it, when what I'm doing in the present is insane? The trauma is present. I know that may be very unlikable to people that don't think that it is, but I would only ask, when you're suffering, where are you when you're suffering? Are you back there when you're thinking you're back there? Or are you here now suffering something that is basically only held in your thinking? And again, I'm not saying not to do it. This is not about not doing anything, and this isn't about doing anything. It's about starting to see that what we're doing is doing. It's happening. Whatever the impact is, it's happening now. That it's happening is an acknowledgement that it's happening, rather than what is happening, what should be happening, what isn't happening, what I wished was happening, what wouldn't be happening if it weren't for this, that, and the other. All that stuff is just a maze created in thinking that we're capable of doing so well that we've done it pretty much, I would say, through at least modern human history, when we had the affluence to consider things beyond the necessity of simply getting water and eating. When that desperation was pretty much our whole day. I don't think there was a lot of disorders. I don't think there was a lot of neurosis. I don't think people were seeing psychiatrists at that time or psychologists. They were actively engaged in simply trying to outrun the sloths and the sabers and whatever it was. There was other humans. Didn't allow for this sort of thinking that we have the luxury to create. And also the distressing nature of the experience. While it's a luxury, it causes distress. It's like a vacation you hate. And what's even vacation means vacating the space I think I'm in, when in fact, like you were talking about, Gabe, when you're in it, you can't see it. But when I think I'm in it, I can't see it either, because I don't let go of anything I don't think I'm having or holding. If I don't think I have it, what's there to let go of? What am I doing? Perpetuating it seemingly unconsciously with conscious decisions to continue to maintain it. Another thing we broached on a little bit today is that there's nothing I can say, there's nothing anyone can say that has us do, since we're free to think what we want, there's nothing anybody can say to force us to think things that are right. So the final say in that regard is our own decision. How willing am I to begin to consider things that might threaten the entirety of everything I think I am? Is the willingness to consider anything in any way that might be contrary to the party line I've maintained when the party's been over for a long time. There's been nothing to celebrate and nothing to party over. Celebration's been over because it's been a dismal failure. How willing am I to consider any of those things? It's what we each have. That freedom comes with responsibility naturally, and choice is that responsibility. If the choice I'm making is to continue to maintain the barricade against these other ideas, again, I am the chooser. I am pointing out my responsibility for the irresponsible actions I've decided to take. Does not make me irresponsible to think irresponsible things. It makes the thinking I'm doing irresponsible, because some thinking is something I do. It's not who I am. So the conclusions I come to, the choices I make, are something I'm doing. If I think it's something I am, I'm doomed. I have no I can't do it. I'm screwed. There's no option. When I see it as something I'm doing, then I can ask the question, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? How am I doing this? At least I'm starting to look at it being a choice to even consider those questions. And all those questions are always seeking answers. How, what, where, when, why? Always. They're seeking answers because we seem to be living in doubt. And if the presumptive basis of our thinking about thoughts being true and real is the problem, it's the content. Maybe thoughts are true and real. Maybe they're just an accuracy. Maybe because they happen without us even thinking about them, they have some basis in nature that far exceeds what we think of them as being. which is also why we tend to think of our human consciousness to this point as only what we're thinking about in our head. So what are we thinking about? We're thinking about our thoughts. We're not thinking about who we are. We're just thinking about thoughts we're having. So if thoughts, let's say they're real and true. So just to get over the hump, just say their thoughts are real and true. The content of those thoughts are choices. How I choose to use my thinking is the variable in my use of thinking, and thinking is primary to the functional capacity of my entire human experience. And by the way, all of our human experience, socially, culturally, and all the different ways we take form as a creature, a species. And if the basic issue of my thinking is wrong about who I am, that's a pretty fundamental flaw in my thinking, to think that anything based on that's ever going to turn into good or value or production. And to have faith in those things, and my contention is we have plenty of faith, we just have faith in faithless things. We have plenty of trust, we've been just trusting things that are bound to fail. We have plenty of belief, we just believe in things that have no basis, that are unbelievable. So that would be, again, a misuse of virtue. Because if I have faith in truth, and I have faith in reality, and I have faith in an absolute nature, all of a sudden, all those other thoughts start to dissipate very quickly. If they take any time at all that time is equal to is the limitation of my concession to that fact. So I'm using time to prove that I'm right. And all I'm experiencing is that I'm absolutely wrong. And I think getting away from the wrong is the goal in life, rather than say, wow, I've got an experience that's accurately assessing what's going on. And if I'm thinking backward, I'm going to think the backward result is also applicable to that thought. And what I want to do is feel better about it or get away from it, rather than say, thank you for the good information you're providing me. And start to see that our nature is very clearly aware of what's going on. So it's clear enough to tell us what's wrong. And that's exactly what our thinking is designed to do, to help us take steps that are productive and useful and whole in relation to our human experience, so we can be the best we can for everyone. And that means producing more than any of us need individually, so we have the same kind of abundance that this absolute source that's given us everything humans have ever had and still is, as a reflection of what we can do in that same way. Because if that's the source, that's our source. And to think of it as some fractured state of thinking is to think of our actions as needing to be fractured too, to prove we're right. To think of it as an absolute source of abundant giving is to start to act in that way too, and start to see that there's always plenty we have and always more that we can do. By doing what we can now, it leads to that more. It's always going to be a consequence of doing what we do now that we have more and more and more that we will not need, because the abundance of that satisfaction is so fulfilling. It's not going to require a new car or a new face or a new this, that, or the other thing to give us something that we'll never get chasing those things anyhow. Just becomes natural. So it becomes easier to satisfy the needs of humans: food, shelter, clothing. We haven't done it yet on this planet. There's always been people dying of starvation, thirst, freezing. Is it necessary? No. It's an option. Do we like it? I would say we do, to allow it and make believe that it shouldn't be happening and that we're going to come up with a new fight to stop it. Fights haven't stopped it yet. They're not going to. Honest awareness of it will start to allow us to see we're restarting it every time we think there's a fight involved, every time we think it's something to overcome socially or culturally, rather than see that it's our own individual struggle that we're struggling with. And the unity that we all share is beginning to actually act functionally literate enough to read this body language we each have and start to see that the decisions we're making individually are affecting everyone everywhere collectively. Always been that way. It's not new, and it's not old. It's present. That's the state of the nation and the condemnation, if we decide to live condemned in this at least appearance of condemnation. And Gabe, to your point, any of those things that aren't loving and abundant are all created in appearance, and they're all created as an impression that is depressing the longer they're maintained. because it's opposing. We're actually creating the landscape of opposition to something we can't even oppose by making believe all the things we think are true and real. So we start trying to create proof in our circumstances and consequences that they're real by thinking that pain actually tells me they're real, rather than again recognize that pain is telling me what's wrong. It's not telling me that what I'm doing is reality. It's telling me I'm doing something wrong. Pain is an indication we are aware that something's wrong, just like anxiety and stress are all indications of that same thing.
For decades, Jack, I thought pain was a confirmation of truth.
Well, the misuse of thinking has had us completely turn things, subvert things to have them appear different ways. I mean, think of that term. When I grew up, I thought if I got away with it, that nobody knew, right? When it comes to thinking, if we get away with it, we're admitting we're taking it with us, right? Because it's being caused by the thinker that thinks it needs to get away. And what happens when I take my body somewhere is the thinking goes with me. So if I get better and better at thinking these thoughts are true, I get better and better at thinking false is reality, and begin to assign pain as something that confirms my reality because I keep facing it. And I'm thinking, well, I need more evidence. I need more proof. So what am I doing? I'm creating fantasy, reality out of fantasy again. If it starts with the seed, it's going to continue in every fractured state of seeming mind, but it's not mind, it's brain. It's thinking that's happening. Our mind is not a visible thing. It's not a tangible thing. It's not a functional thing in a human way. The mind is the essence of a knowing that existed well before humans ever got here and started thinking. And it didn't even exist before that because it's a present state. It's not in time or space. These things are hard to conceive of, but even considering them is the greatest contemplative meditation I think exists, because it starts to reveal that meditative state we find when we look for it is always there. Why is it always there? Because it's the natural state of our existence. And it's 24/7. When we want to consider it within time, it's always happening. It's always available. It's always our present state of awareness. It doesn't come and go. It doesn't come in size or shape or color. It's a present state of being and knowing that we know we know. And there's no proof in it whatsoever. And yet, when we start functioning on that basis, the confirmation of that reality starts to be applicable in ways that we couldn't possibly imagine from the insane ideas we have. And things start happening that seem like miracles, but they're not miracles at all. The miracle was that we actually thought fighting reality and truth was our best option. That's the miracle. And that we could do it generation after generation after generation, thinking someday this will come true. Someday the fight's going to be won, and see that every generation has a new fight, a new crusade. None of them are ever won. All that's left are the bodies on the side of the road and the wreckage that the youth of today is starting to realize they've been asked to bear, because the adults have been saying that children are our future so long that we haven't done anything productive enough to have them inherit the absolute bounty that we've all been given in a way that it was less corrupt and less disabled. We've actually added to the worsening of it to give them more and more to deal with. But the beauty is, within the scope of absolute nature, nature gets better immediately when we stop contaminating it. All on its own. We don't have to know what to do if we just begin to stop. And the beginning of stopping is the concession, the full concession that we're responsible for whatever part we've played. Doesn't mean there aren't things going on in nature that are happening that are just natural. But for whatever we've played that isn't natural and is unhealthy and diseased, we've played that part. And we're culpable for that part. And the fact is, we're not going to, using the same thinking, ever fix that part. We're going to continue to break it and break it and break it and break it and make believe that somehow we'll get better by doing the exact same thing that addiction does, which is to reverse everything and make believe that reality and truth is exactly what we think it is, rather than the fact is, if we begin to notice we're starting it all, we can actually have the choice, start to recover the choice that we thought we didn't have, and beginning to notice that we're part of it all, that we're actually inherently, naturally connected to it all. And whatever our responsibility is our responsibility. And I would suggest it's 100%. Each of us, all of us, everything It's 100%. There is no violation. In an absolute source, there is nothing but responsibility. What does that mean? I'm able to respond. Reactivity is not the ability to respond, but to knee-jerk, to defend, to fight. And the distinction between the two is obvious to any of us. As you begin to look freely, you've always been free. As you begin to look freely, you're going to see honestly what's been going on in ways that you've never even considered. And typically, you're going to have a tear or two. Because my experience is that I was so pent up with sadness and upset and grief and mourning, not for all the people that I used to justify it who had died, my mother, my father, all that stuff, but for the moments that I denied, the potential that I denied, the people that ultimately died in masses as a result of the conspiratorial involvement of this thinking as being the only thing I could possibly do, and realize that the impact on it has given people who are completely ill-intended and violent and hateful the freedom to do what they want in the name of it being right, while I've been a culpable participant in that thinking, regardless of the activities that I've done that may seem better to theirs. I've been culpable for theirs too. And that moment can come at any moment because it's always present. And the only thing that really comes is an actual acknowledgement of our own involvement and our own culpability and our own responsibility. And to be responsible and notice it and begin to admit it in all respects for all things is begin to quickly see the alignment we have to an absolute knowing nature that doesn't cause fear through the responsibility. It simply gives us a level of support where we begin to see. There's a doctor, give you an example, Dr. Christopher Kerr, Kerr. He's witnessed over 1,000 people die. He said in every case, we've talked about this before in the issue of near-death experiences. He said, these are not near-death experiences. I watch people in hospice care, he's a doctor, die. And I've watched enough of them die to see what happens. And he said they all have a reckoning with their past in a way that creates virtue out of it rather than sees it as something they regret and feel condemned by. In every case, he sees this awakening. He said, I don't see fear in the face of death at all. I see people starting to come to terms with their life. Why do we wait for death? Why do we wait for near-death experiences? But to maintain the opinion, someday, somehow, the thought I'm having that has never come true in the present, that can't seem to come true where I am, that can't seem to happen now, will someday, somehow be perfected if I continue the denial, if I continue the defense, if I continue the fight. Someday, somehow, I'll be proven right. And because that someday, somehow hasn't come yet, I can live in the delusion with confidence that someday it will when it never seems to. And it never does in the moment. And all the experience I've had so far has told me, no, it doesn't happen then and there. It's happening now. And if I'm not paying attention to that, I'm missing the opportunity to see that the bolstering, completely absolute loving nature is exactly what people facing death find. And we do not need to wait till death to face that or find it. And I would say that has been one of the crippling aspects of human existence, is that we talk about an afterlife that's spectacular, but we forget that that life, if it is as spectacular as we imagine, is infinite and must be where we are now. And to deny it would be insane, given that it is everything for everyone all the time, and would give us a wisdom, a level of wisdom that would be so incredible that none of us would want to take credit for it. We'd all just be thankful for it. Period. Simple, easy. Anyway, Dr. Christopher Kerr, interesting to watch. I forget off the top of my head. You know what? Let me pull up my notes. I'll give you the name of his documentary. He did a documentary where he actually, Kerr, Dr. Kerr, Death is But a Dream. And he was a guy who apparently was going into he was going to be a cardiac surgeon, which is probably one of the most economically satisfying aspects because it's so expensive. And he was introduced to this, and I don't know if it was because he had to do some of his apprenticeship or his early doctoring, and he was exposed to the convalescent care and this last stage of people's lives. And he said, this is what I want to do. This is as fulfilling as anything I've ever done. And he's got a 25 or 30 year history now of doing that. So worth asking ourselves those questions and not actually looking for an answer, but living with the question, living with the, if we know, then looking for the answer is futile because we already know. Living with the question is beginning to see that we have a lot of questions about the way we're thinking. And if we aim that in the right direction and start to notice that it's what we're doing, if I see everything as reversed, I am the reverser. If I see everything as backward, my thinking, it's not me, I just said it incorrectly. It's not me that's reversed, it's my thinking that's reversed. I'm using it out of order because I'm thinking of it as my primary source rather than my human state. It's primary to my human condition, but it's not primary to my knowing awareness at all. It's secondary. It came as a result of that knowing source. It's a product of that knowing source. Thinking is a product of an absolute knowing nature. It is not the creator of that nature. If I can create my thoughts and what I contain in those thoughts, how is it that my thoughts can all of a sudden become who I am and all that I am? That's crazy. Impossible. I can't be what I do. But what I do can be an expression of who I am and who we are. And what we can do collectively is profoundly greater than the greatness we've thought we achieved by making believe that the things that we do are so profound, when in fact they're nothing compared to the capacity we have to do things that would satisfy everyone's need rather than our own immediate needs. Very different concept. And if the nature of nature is natural and absolute, this is in fact our nature, not one that's debatable, but certainly one we can debate, not one that's optional, but certainly one we can think is an option, not one that comes in size or goes. It's not probably a coincidence that mistaking things creates misgivings. We cause the effects we suffer from. We're not bystanders to those effects. Cause always precedes effects. When we're witnessing sadness, mourning, grief, all that kind of stuff, it's all based on what we're thinking. And if who we are is infinite in nature, and there is no death in that, nobody ever dies, they just transform. They do what bodies are designed to do because my body, your body has been changing the entire time we've ever had it. And will continue as long as we have it. It's constantly being transformed. Deepak Chopra said that every 7 years, our cells completely regenerate in our bodies. I don't seem to be mourning my body from 7 years ago. I've never heard of anybody do that. But when bodies are lost, it's not to say we shouldn't or can't have an experience, that we miss people and we long for them. But I would again suggest that what we're longing for and missing is the potential we have as a result of the tribute we give them by thinking they're not here anymore, to start noticing that the value is how we treat everyone else in being here in the exact same way that that being of them is still here. Their body may have gone, but that absolute essence can't go anywhere because it's not a spatially driven, time-bound reality. It's reality in the real sense, not reality in the fake sense and the false sense and in the I made it up sense. Any thoughts?
No, all makes sense. Maybe you could talk about the meditation. You touched on it earlier. I didn't want to interrupt the flow, but meditating to try and think of nothing or stop thinking, like to have an empty mind.
Well, I think what we talked about is that today is that meditation is our natural state. So when I think I need to stop thinking to meditate, I'm again thinking is in charge of controlling meditation, when in fact all it's doing is preoccupying me with the idea that thinking is controlling meditation. So I'm going to constantly think about my thinking. And when I think I shouldn't be thinking, I have to be thinking about not thinking. Kind of crazy. That's that loop, that not so merry-go-round. But if our meditative state is an actual state of awareness, which we're always in, and I would suggest if we are aware, we're aware, that is the meditative state that we keep seeking through thinking, when in fact it's the one we're always in, thinking we're not. So the freedom, if I think my thinking is reality and truth, and my thinking is not real and true, it's just thoughts I'm having about things that I think are what I think rather than what they are, then using that and relying on that is committing myself to an interminable struggle to try to get somewhere. I can't realize it because I'm denying that I'm already there now. I'm denying that absolute state of awareness is what I am, how I am, where I am right now. It's not somewhere else. So to think it's somewhere else, to seek it, is to think, I got to go find it. What is that? I'm claiming it isn't here. It isn't now. I'm claiming the now, the present, isn't present. Again, that's a breach of reality and truth based on the idea my thinking is true and real. So what am I going to do? Make reality and truth appear to be something different than it is. So it's a lot easier to meditate when you begin to realize it's your constant state. And one of the basic premises of this conversation is that we're aware 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of our experience. We're always aware of it. Dreams are examples of it. We're constantly conscious and aware. To start to begin to concede these things, and I would say principles are the basic ideas of something that does not change, spiritual principles anyhow, where in fact evil principles and false principles are also true. What I try to do that's false will never work. That's an absolute principle. Trying to turn insanity into reality will never work. All those things are things that won't work. Why don't they work? Because they don't exist. They don't have any basis. They're not in the bounty of an absolute abundant source. They're not in there. They're just thoughts, imagining to be true and real. So if the basis of my existence is the basis of my existence, then I always know it. I just don't think I know it because of this preponderance of reliance on thinking that is a mistake to misuse as my only source. So my awareness starts to perk up when I start to concede. I always know that I know. And I will suggest to you, one of the bits of evidence is, think of how quickly we recognize what's wrong in others. We wouldn't have that clarity if we didn't have a sense of what's right. But we've mistaken it for something they're doing rather than what we're doing. And the difference is in that relationship, which we've gone over before, is the fuck you or the thank you. If I begin to see that things people do that bother me are gifts they're giving me to see the things I don't think I'm doing, they've given me the perspective that one-dimensional, that zero-dimensional, single-pointed head that I have that seems to be stuck in thinking can't have because it's a single point. It doesn't have any perspective. I'm seeing that people are giving me that option, that opportunity. Now I'm seeing this, Gabe, awake, right? I'm starting to allow this awakened state to become 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, rather than the 20 minutes I sit alone to be reassured that there is some greater thing and then walk out into the world and wonder why I never see it. I haven't practiced it in the face of all the changing variables that I can, so I haven't gotten very flexible in my capacity to think in terms that are more yogic, flexible, able. So I operate on a dysfunctional basis rather than a functional basis. And responsibility, again, is the ability to respond. What am I responding to? My environment, circumstances, the functional literacy is reading the body language and all the signs around me that are speaking perfectly clearly. And if I'm not reversing the order of what they're doing and in conflict and thinking I'm going to fight it, and I think you pointed that out earlier, Gabe, was the coming to that point where you thought, oh, it's the fight. It's seeing the fight. Yes, it's the fight. It's the internal conflict. When I'm having the conflict, I don't have to think about the thought I'm having specific to that conflict. I can realize that anytime I'm fighting anything, I'm going to feel conflicted.
Yeah.
And now I'm speaking to all thoughts rather than a thought. Because if I start trying to fix a thought, I'm going to start having at least two more thoughts, which are going to multiply and replicate very quickly. And if you double a penny for a month, I think it turns out to be 11 million cumulative dollars. So if every time I have a thought and I think I fixed it, but I have two new thoughts, generally filled with doubt because I'm thinking incorrect, rather than thinking about thinking in total, I'm thinking about thinking individually, and I'm not thinking about thinking now. I'm thinking about the content of my thought that I'm trying to fix, rather than see that I can think about it all. I can think as generally as possible and include everything in it and say, what if this is just something I'm doing and thinking that's wrong, causing all of the thinking I'm doing to feel wrong? And as a fact, what I'm feeling and experiencing is in fact accurate for what I'm doing in thought, not who I am, not what I am, not where none of the other things are answered by that. It's just what I'm doing in thought. Now, the present state of my awareness becomes a little clearer because I'm seeing things clearly from the most basic general point of view, rather than, it's not even a point of view. It's starting to see that the point is that there's no point. It's just whatever's happening is happening as it is. Doesn't require me to make any points about it. But if I begin to concede the general authenticity of reality and truth, I begin to actually be fascinated in an awe-inspired way, rather than one that feels like I've accomplished something I need to take credit for and tell everybody about because now I'm proud because I did one little thing about one little thing, and then find out, why do I have 6 more of these thoughts now I seem to battle, and want to pretend that I can push those off. So the awakened state is noticing it's happening 24 hours a day. We might as well function on that basis and just concede it and start to even think that it's possible. Like mentioned earlier, if I think that it's even possible, I can start doing this, then at least I consider it, rather than, I don't have to agree with it. Reality doesn't have to be agreed with for it to be functioning exactly as it's functioning right now. It's always functional. So when I apply anything in that direction, it starts to become much more valuable, and I start to be fulfilled immediately, not because I'm immediately fulfilled, but because I'm immediately beginning to recognize the fulfillment that I've always had, that I have been diminished in my capacity and put a dent in by the weight I was holding and the pain I was experiencing, thinking it wasn't happening because all those things proved, in fact, that I was wrong, while I was using them all to claim that I was right. And the only existence I had was in those thoughts and all that investment. There's no interest in that investment that can be paid enough to keep our interest. It's not interesting. It's insane to be interested in it. It's insane to do those things over and over again, thinking they're going to someday all of a sudden become true. And we've had no proof whatsoever that it's possible, ever. And yet don't look at it as something any other than possible if we just keep pushing, just keep plugging, just keep going. It actually shows that the meditative state is in perfect order, because if we try to violate the principles of existence, we find quickly that violation feels like a violation. It feels like a rape. It feels like a complete offset. We don't belong where we are. We need to get somewhere else. All those things are conditions created by our own thinking. And we contribute to the thinking of others. So when they do something stupid, we think of it as them, rather than, no, I was party to this whole thing the whole time. I've been feeding into that grid of energy and whatever it is that people are experiencing. I'm part of it. I'm not apart from it. And when we all look at it as being responsible, there's not going to be a lot we need to do. It's going to happen quickly. It's going to be what they call paradigm shifts, critical mass. It's an awareness that just, bam, just like everybody realized the earth is not at the center of the universe. Okay, let's get on with things. What happened? Things got a little easier to deal with in space, to understand quickly. Didn't take a lot of mathematics to figure that out, because it was already figured out. Now all we needed to do was apply it accordingly, rather than think we needed to get there. Our knowing nature, we know we're aware, that is our meditative state, our present state of being. We can argue it, we can fight it, but all we do is create impressions that aren't true and then make believe they're true, because the reversal of doing that is insane. Everything that comes out of it is going to seem like sanity is the only sane thing to do. We're seeing it full view. I mean, I was talking to my granddaughter about this yesterday, who's 12, and I said, there's much more evidence today than there's ever been. And she said, probably not. She said, we're probably just starting to see it more clearly. And it's always been there, but we couldn't talk about it as openly. And I think she's right. Social media, all this telepathic, this televised effort is giving us the information that we used to think wasn't happening because we didn't see it. And all of a sudden we're seeing it and thinking we're a little overwhelmed by it, but it's been going on for a long time historically. The point is, there is no time in the present. There's no time like the present because there's no time in the present. And this is the actual access point to reality and truth because it's always present. It does not operate in space and time. It does not come or go depending on time. It is not concerned about its age at all. Doesn't think about dying. Doesn't think at all, as a matter of fact. Knowing knows. What's there to think about? That's the beginning of an absolute state of meditation, recognizing it's our common, natural 24/7 reality. And if you begin to consider that, you'll start to see a huge shift in the thinking you do about how things are going. And also notice, as I certainly have, is that I really am sort of defective in the way that I deal with things. I haven't really practiced dealing with things honestly, so I've given myself the impression I dealt with them by ignoring them. And when I start facing them, I start realizing that there's a little education involved in how to be in a relationship, how to have a conversation, how to talk about my thoughts as thoughts rather than reality and truth and insist everybody believe in them like I do, or I hate them, or don't want anything to do with them, or think that they're toxic when I'm spewing toxic waste and imagining I need to stay away from other people. And all they've done is challenged me by whatever they're doing to see what I'm doing. They're actually giving me a gift, just like we were talking about earlier. I can say thank you to those people who seem to aggravate me rather than fuck you. The bubble of this awareness is as quickly as we're willing to see things accurately, and to consider things is to even consider that they may be, possibly could be true. And even that slight little bit, it's kind of like thinking you are on a ramp that's filled with ice. If you go any further, you might slip. I can guarantee you, if you do, you will. Probably not the happiest metaphor, but if reality is real and we begin to simply allow that it may be, the shifting change of the thinking we do about all the stuff that isn't will change dramatically, quickly. And the other thing that's a little bit odd is you almost don't notice it because reality feels so natural. You don't notice it like you do the pain that grows and takes time to develop and all that stuff that seems to be commensurate. The opinion that we've done it for so long means we have to retrace our steps is not true because we haven't taken any steps. Any step I thought of in time is not in the sand. It's not on a beach somewhere. There's no effect I've caused other than the grappling nature of trying to have other people conspire with me so we can all do things wrong and prove we're right. Anyway. So my sense is we've taken a self personally. We take a self seriously that doesn't even exist. And to take it seriously means we take it personally, doesn't exist. You know what persona is in definition, etymologically?
Mm-hmm.
It's a mask. So our persona that we take things personally to is basically a mask for who we are, but it can't even mask who we are because we're not something that's even based in space and time. It can't cover it up. So we're really relying on this human experience as being all that we are. And to have a body is somewhat of an admission that it's something we have, not something we are. To have thoughts is an admission there's something we have, not something we are. We are the haver of those things. We are the responsible party for that thing we have, that body. It's not who we are. We have a name for it that we were given. Didn't come with a name. Didn't come with a birth certificate until humans came up with that. Not saying those things are wrong. I'm just suggesting what we do with things doesn't create reality and truth. It just creates what we do with things and what we choose. And to feel they're true and real thing gives us the impression there's nothing we can do about it. And while we're the ones doing the wrong about it, we think there's nothing we can do but continue to be wrong. Not true, but we can think it is. We're free to. And I would say everything that's happening now, we're perfectly satisfied with, or we wouldn't be continuing to do what we're doing that's promoting it, contaminating our greater capacity. We're freely doing this. And that's the insanity of it. Nobody in their right mind would do this. Bingo. We're all culpable. We're all participants. And that's the beauty of responsibility, is not seeing it as something I take on my own shoulders, like I'm Atlas holding the world on my head and my shoulders. It's starting to see that if that's accurate, we're all responsible. So there's 8 billion plus irritants that could be turned into valuable resources that are not necessarily functioning on that level now. That's a big group to think of as capable of beginning to actually express reality and truth, and love is the basis of reality and truth. Generosity, supportive, conscientious, aware, considerate. I would say these problems we think we have would be short-lived compared to the years we've taken to develop them. Wouldn't take much, and all we've done hasn't been enough yet. So it may be worth considering it's not the only thing we can do. Each of us, individually. It starts with each of us. None of us are reliant on anyone else to tell us what to do. None of us have ever decided anything that we didn't want to decide. So wherever we are, whatever we think we have, has all come as a result of everything we've ever decided. And in the broader sense, also everything everyone else has decided. We're not effects to those things because it's how we responded to those things, how we reacted to those things that have caused our experience. We're simply allowing things to be. All of a sudden, our experience is very free because we're not having opinions about everything. We're not generating the balancing act of trying to think of them right. As they are, what they are, as they are, how they are now. It's how we are, by the way, as we are now, in a united way, not in a divided way, not in a separated way. Addiction is the idea that doing more wrong will eventually be right. You can see the conflict in it, and you will start seeing the conflicts in your own choices as you start to witness them from a perspective that begins to allow your observatory capacity, which is absolutely fully intact right now, to begin to be the source of your awareness rather than making believe all you're aware of is what you think. So you've always known it. It's the concession of the thinking that you're doing that's causing the impression that you don't, that you must think is true to make believe that what you actually know, what you really know, has no basis and would be impractical to even think about, because it would be easy to see how impractical the other thinking we've been doing is, in fact, to maintain and to promote ideas that are insane as being eventually, hopefully, sane, is to think that faith in faithless things is possible, and hope in hopeless things is possible, and dishonesty and honesty, or honesty and dishonesty, is possible. The only thing honest about dishonesty is that it's dishonest. If something has no faithless, if it's not faithful, it doesn't matter how much faith we have, it's going to fail. It's not what I say. It's not what anyone says. It's what we all think that we are most affected by, as our experience is attuned to what each other is doing, very much attuned, very much aware. We don't need Instagram or Twitter or cell phones to be telepathically connected. We are. All these things are metaphors for humans trying to take credit for our interconnectedness. Most valuable companies on the planet now are companies that promote this interconnectedness in commercialized form, when in fact we've always been connected in every way to everything that exists. And we've used a desensitization to that awareness as the claim to our superiority and individuality, neither of which can be true because they're both isolating, lonely places to even think we exist. but no lonelier than that dimension of zero, I would say, where nothing exists, acting as though the only point we can make is that all that exists is what we think about nothing. Nothing in its actual form probably provides the space for everything, as if things are accurate. But I also suspect, as physicists are starting to see, is that what we used to consider nothing actually contains more of everything than everything that there currently is in terms of the local thinking about how things add up. Matter has been considered to be the thing that obstructs space, but there's beginning to see that space itself has more matter in it than the way we've been thinking about mattering, the way we've been defining it. Now, none of that's changed because we've been thinking about it incorrectly for centuries. It's always been doing what it's been doing. That's nice. That's a relief. It isn't a threat. It'll always do what it's been doing. If we concede that, there's nothing else for us to ever seek or have a quest on, because there won't be any questions, because what is absolute is not questionable. It's not in doubt. It's a state of being that we all share and that is absolute for all of us and everything, all that are and all that is.
Agreed.
It was good to talk this morning, Gabe. It really helps early in the morning. It's nice to be out there in the fresh air and there were no seals barking, and with the boats, it's nice to get our feet moving and talk about this. And I suspect for everyone out there, it isn't what happens during the time you listen to this, but what you do with it in terms of my sense, in terms of value. And the value doesn't always come quickly, and it isn't always recognized immediately. But the talking about it from your own point of view, from your own perspective, from any awareness you get to anyone, gives you a chance to begin to notice how, first of all, difficult it can be to talk about things accurately and actually put words to things that seem to be wordless and seem to not have been spoken of, but also to the ability we have to actually affect other people's experience and be part of their growth simply by witnessing our own willingness to be honest about what we're experiencing. Not in a way that challenges them or presumes that they need to listen and hear. And it's not a new story. It's not a story supporting a reactive narrative to talk about what's actually going on. It's actually a relief to people, and you'll see it in their face and their responses to you. You'll notice it. And it may take a minute, but we've spent thousands of years protecting the idea that taking a minute is much too much time, because we need to be reactive immediately and protective immediately and defensive all the time and burst. What do they call it? Like burrow in to constantly be on guard. It's all come from what we're each doing individually, not what everyone else is doing collectively. Though there are certainly ramifications that would suggest that. But if I'm doing it myself, nobody has a greater impact on my experience than the things I'm doing that put me at odds with the thing I think I am, rather than recognizing there is nothing at odds with everything that I actually am and everything we are. None, nothing at all. The opposite of the infinite is infinite. It's interesting to that point earlier about taking opposite positions. The absolute is revealed when we take a position, a point. When we guard that point and take it as our position, we're actually claiming that all other points don't exist, while in fact we're confirming all other points exist to even have a point to take. So again, the presumption of this thinking is not reality. It's an opinion to help support the idea that it's reality, when in fact it actually is denying reality that is visible and plain for anyone to see if they're looking clearly. Anybody, anytime, you're going to see it as quickly as you are willing to look. You're going to see it and sort of slap your head, and like the old juice commercial, I could have had a V8. Like that moment where you just go, oh, of course. I've known that. There's a timelessness in it that actually will immediately not engulf in flames, but engulf in all your experience, all the things you thought that will be corrected according to reality rather than this misperception of reality we placed on them to have these lingering chads dangling in the distance of the past and this doomed future and all that. None of that exists except for our thinking. It's not about not thinking. It's about seeing that we're thinking has very good use and it's functioning properly all the time. And we're the cause. Our choices are the cause of the dysfunction. And desperation is no excuse to think we have no other choice, because all we're going to do is continue to choose desperate options to perpetuate the myth that it's all that's happening. It's all that can happen. It's all we are. It's all that is. Once again, to make believe that's truth and reality. It isn't. So, love you guys.
Thanks, Jack.
Love you. Thanks for the time, Jack. Aloha, Gabe.
Aloha.
You're welcome, Janet. It's good to see you and your paintings.
Good to
Thanks.
see you always. I love you guys. You're my family.
Of course.
As is everyone.
Exactly.
Bye.
Bye.